Yeah.
Our next topic then is about 8K, the arguably failed TV standard that may one day make a resurgence, but specifically its appearance on a box. You see, when the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X launched, both consoles had either an icon or a blurb of text noting that they support 8K, but obviously neither console supports 8K. This week, however, it became clear, and based on various things we've seen, including on the PlayStation Direct, on Amazon listings, photos of real boxes, Sony has finally removed the 8K label from the PS5 box. And this is an interesting thing because fundamentally, I don't think anybody realistically expected quote-unquote 8K gaming. Like, there is one native 8K game between all the machines, and it's The Tourist on PS5. Which technically does do a full 8K frame buffer. They're doing it, but there's no way to get that to your screen. And that comes down to them just not enabling this feature at the firmware level. But there's also some question as to whether it actually could be supported. So as we know, PlayStation 5's HDMI output is limited to 32 gigabits per second, while Xbox goes up to 40 gigabits per second. With that in place, what that meant right now is if you're doing 4K 120, the PS5 needs to switch to chroma subsampling of 422, right? Which is actually the same if you do Dolby Vision on Xbox, which also has to switch to 422 because Dolby Vision is a 12-bit standard rather than 10-bit. So that bumps up. Although the whole chroma subsampling stuff's weird because, like, if you do 4K 60 on Xbox, it's also limited. It's limited to like 420 and 422. You can't do 444 at 4K 60 on an Xbox. But if you do 4K 120, you can do, but not Dolby Vision, you can do 444. PS5 does 444 in all modes except for 4K 120. But 32 gigabytes per second, I'm not sure is enough to handle an 8K 60 output. I think it could do it with 420 chroma subsampling. And by the way, for those that are confused by these numbers, essentially you think about each of those digits represents sort of like the resolution
RGB.
of the color values of RGB, right? So if you have 4, in this case, 4 is like full native match resolution output, right? If you do like 2, it's like half that, versus 0, it's like quarter of that, right? So 420 is like quarter res on red. And then I forget which ones are limited, but it basically reduces
I think
the
it's
resolution.
green is the one that's kept high res, if I'm not mistaken.
I think green is the high res one, but it's basically reducing bandwidth cost by reducing the resolution of specific color channels, right? It's a long old school thing. It's been around forever. This was always used in like video compression formats and different broadcast things. It's a very common thing. It's still used today. It's not actually that noticeable in high res though. But the PS5, I think, would have to do 420. The bigger problem there, though, is that it would also be limited to 8 bits per channel. So 8-bit color, you need 10-bit for HDR. Otherwise, you get severe grading. So it's very likely that the PS5 could not support 8K 60 output with HDR at 10-bit. With its current hardware level. So even if they did enable 8K, you wouldn't want to use it. And frankly, the only reason to enable it at all would be to essentially have the PS5 do the scaling versus the TV. Xbox, on the other hand, I think actually could do proper 8K 10-bit. They would probably still need to do chroma subsampling, but I think they could do the full 10-bit no problem. So you could actually get 8K 60, but alas, that one also doesn't support it. But I say alas because ultimately 8K has not panned out. It was probably thought to become a thing in 2020 when these shipped. But fundamentally, I think 8K right now is a bad idea. It's not worth buying them because you're going to be upscaling basically everything. The bigger issue here, though, is like they put 8K on the box and neither system could support it. And while I do think they were probably trying to get ahead of the ball, realistically, it's not accurate. They put information on those boxes that is not true. And, you know, when you take that off, I mean, what do you guys think about this? Should it have been there in the first place? Are you happy to see it gone?
Should not have been there in the first place. I really it was a joke. It was really a joke back then because the
we joke about that a lot, right?
Yeah, like the lack of penetration of the panels themselves in the market at that point. And then we already knew how ridiculous 4K was for, like, we even said it like before this gen started. We had like a ballpark idea of like where the GPUs were, and we were like, yeah, I doubt they're going to even be hitting native 4K for a lot of games. Turns out to be true, but like then quadrupling that to get up to 8K, no, it's ridiculous. That's why the Tourist is the only internally rendered to our knowledge. There could perhaps be others that we just don't know about.
That's true.
But like there's a reason why. And yeah, I just thought it was dumb, and then putting it on the box was just like, I'm a little bit shocked though that there hasn't anything come out of it, because usually if you put a sticker on a box for a long period of time and it just never gets support, usually there's something that comes out of it. We've seen it in the past with the GTX 970, for example. 4 gigabyte on the box. That was a really big deal. Curious to see if anything comes out of this. I only know about it on the PlayStation 5, but you said it was also an 8K sticker on the Series Xbox.
Yes, correct.
John?
So essentially on the side of the box it says 8K HDR, and it has a little text blurb about that as well. So they did the same thing. However, like I said, unlike the PS5, I think the HDMI output on Xbox could technically support it. So I think Microsoft could realistically add this support if they were so inclined, but I'm not sure that there's really even any reason to do so, because I don't think the consoles would do a better job upscaling the content to that resolution versus the TVs themselves, right?
It's also a memory hog at that point.
Like outputting an 8K frame buffer.
There's still a frame buffer that has to be held somewhere in memory there, and the TV is going to be doing it otherwise, probably with worse input latency as a result. But like, I don't know if you want to just be already on memory constrained platforms, and yes, they are memory constrained.
Yes,
like just having an 8K frame buffer lying around for no good reason. I don't see any reason for it.
I genuinely don't think it makes sense in any case. It shouldn't have been on the box. And the thing is, though, is with the removal of it, people were like, oh, they're just gearing up for the PS5 Pro. It's going to be 8K. I'm not convinced. I really don't. I don't think the PS5 Pro will support that either, or be designed.
I hope it isn't.
I hope it's not. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It is.
If it does,
it's a waste of time.
If it does, I want to make a video like I did with the RTX 3090 with 8K, and I was like, this doesn't look good.
Here's the thing, Alex. Remember during the 39 era, NVIDIA was talking about 8K gaming, right? That was kind of like a marketing beat at one point. That went away. When they released their newer, more powerful cards, they really didn't talk about 8K anymore. And I think what's happened is like nobody cares about it. And you'll have the pundits that say, oh, well, people used to say the same about 1080p and 4K. But I think the difference here is that, yes, while more pixels can be desirable, we've reached the point, especially in a living room setting, where you can't perceive the difference much anymore. Like we've reached the limit of what our eyes can see at a normal viewing distance. Like, I think 8K can look really sharp, especially if you walk up super close to it, right? But it's something that I think most people aren't going to be able to appreciate much at all, even if it is available. And also, there's not many 8K displays being made. I think there's actually fewer of them today than there used to be.
Yes. Actually, what's happened in the TV market, which I've surveilled recently, as you have, as you have, John, is that it used to be the case that all the major TV manufacturers, at least those that were making high-end displays, were making 8K panels. But recently, only Samsung has been updating their 8K line every year. Everyone else has been, Sony will sell you an 8K TV, but it's like from 2022 or 2021, right? It's not their most
LG still has like
model.
a $20,000, like almost 100-inch 8K OLED on the market.
Yeah. So, like, I'm just hoping we stick with 4K for a good while longer. And a big reason for that is because, like, I don't know if people remember go back to like 2010 when Apple was advertising their iPhone 4s, right? But they were talking about the concept at that point of a Retina display. And I think people really need to keep in mind that the human eye is limited in terms of the arc minutes of detail that it can resolve at any given time, at a given distance, at a given panel resolution, at a given pixel density. So, like, 4K is already a really high resolution for TVs, in my opinion, at typical viewing distances.
It is.
It's really high, to the point where, like, we can go quite low res with content. We can go to 1440p with content and have it look good, even if we're just doing a simple bicubic upscale or something. It can look quite good. And with games, it's going to come down to a lot of factors like the quality of the anti-aliasing or whatever. But with video content, if it existed, I'd struggle to see the difference between 4K and 8K at any reasonable distance. Indeed, when I've seen demos of 8K content on like 85-inch panels, like huge panels, I've had to go up like really uncomfortably close before I feel like I can actually resolve that detail in a way that would actually be significantly more appealing to me than just looking at a 4K encode of the same content.
Right.
And then beyond that, you just have like a total dearth of actual 8K sources like Netflix, Amazon Prime, iTunes. They're not going to show you 8K content.
Even.
Those services aren't even necessarily delivering a top shelf 4K experience because their bitrate is limited. There's no 8K physical media to my knowledge.
Nope.
There's no looming standard in production pipelines, because you got to think about this as well, right? For television, for movies, for all this stuff, people are not producing content at 8K. They're not shooting at 8K except to crop it in afterwards. They're not doing VFX at 8K. They barely started doing VFX at 4K.
Right.
Right.
So, I think it's just an issue where like the utility of it in terms of that pixel density, it's not there. I really don't think it's there. In most scenarios. Maybe if you're looking at a nice big monitor, like a 27-inch, 32-inch monitor, I could see some utility. Like I'm looking at a 5K monitor right now. I can barely see the difference between that and a 4K monitor of a similar size. But for a television, I think the utility is a lot more limited.
Yeah, I think you're right. On the monitor thing, I was thinking smaller screens actually benefit more from high res because you're much closer to them. I would even say something like, Alex, Rich, and I are all using OLED screens as our monitor. I'm at a 48-inch and it's 42-inch and sit pretty close to it. Having more pixels could be somewhat beneficial to a degree, although you'd still run into the problem where you have to upscale stuff because you can't really run at those high resolutions. But I actually checked on LG's site here. They only sell 2 8K screens at this point. And the OLED one is a Z3, which means it would have been the 2023 line, and they may not have done a Z4. So, I think it's going away at some point.
The sales are really going down, and then also, like, alternatively, in the far-flung future here, I'd say that maybe there could be some real-time AI upscaling or something on the panel end of things, something like the Topaz, video AI stuff. Maybe if they get that running in real time, on some television set somewhere, that could give you a meaningfully better experience with 4K content than an 8K panel. Maybe that's a possibility. Maybe in the future they could add more detail to it. I just think that when you're looking at these super high pixel counts, the additional utility of adding on just more pixels, it gets to a point where it's not super relevant. In some contexts, it is relevant, like when you're looking at extremely dense panels for VR headsets.
Sure.
They're
that's the
extreme
one
pixel
space.
densities.
Yeah, you want that.
Exactly. But in these televisions, I think the utility is a lot less.
I'd rather see the feature set move in the direction of higher refresh rates for this. Like, I'd rather see 4K 240 become more popular. I mean, that's also ridiculous. Like, driving 240 hertz at 4K is hard, but we have now things like DLSS 3 frame generation. We have the proliferation of good upscaling up to 4K from lower resolutions, thanks to things like XeSS and DLSS. So, like, that seems much more reasonable than 8K from a gamer's perspective. And I hope it stays that way. And I don't think, for example, the PS5 Pro, if they are going to do some sort of 8K demo, I'm going to maybe want to pick it apart because I feel like it's a really big waste of time.
It's interesting, Alex, though. You mentioned 4K 240, but I feel like largely we've seen PC gamers largely pushing back against more pixel resolution in favor of more higher refresh rates. Like, popular PC displays all tend not to be 4K. The people that go for the highest end displays are picking lower res, but like extremely high refresh rate monitors over more pixels. So I really feel like there was like this ramp up to get more and more pixels. And then in the last few years, it's just kind of gone back down and people realize like maybe that's not where we should be going. And it's kind of fallen out of favor. And I really think, maybe 8K will eventually have some success. I'm skeptical that it'll be anytime soon, but I think for now you can kind of put a pin in it. And like the attempt at an 8K wave has failed. Nobody wants it. It's not only is it not worth the money, it's not really that desirable in most cases, because again, you'd be upscaling everything, which who the heck wants that? Like, that's just not cool. So yeah, I think 8K is dead. Sony removed it from the box. That's good. It should never have been there in the first place. It was that's why we've always poked fun at it. Like, they were no. Well, it's part of the HDMI 2.1 standard, and maybe that also influenced them to put it on the boxes, where it's just like, oh yeah, HDMI 2.1, we could eventually patch in 8K support. But yeah. So there is one question from one of our patrons, Paul Kalamata, who asks, some of the commentary that I've read regarding the 8K label that was present on PS5 boxes suggests that it was a cynical and deceptive marketing ploy. I find this fairly difficult to believe, as I don't really see how that would have duped consumers into buying the console. When the console launched, 8K TVs represented a minuscule part of the addressable market, and the marketing around the new consoles and games revolved around support for 4K. Could that label simply have been present as a technical specification detailing something that the console could use in the future if content like video streaming became 8K? And now that they're removing the label, given that the uptake has been very slow and it's largely irrelevant part of the addressable market. Oh, now perhaps they're removing it because of that. Do you think it was actually intended to be deceptive, or do you think they actually had real plans to support 8K in the future?
I think they must have planned at some point.
Right.
Then I think they probably did expect 8K displays to take off more than they have, and they would have expected, like, hey, we need to actually service these 8K displays with content. We need to provide, I don't know, upscaling to the televisions. We need to show them something. Maybe we can have a couple games here and there that could actually do an 8K display mode, like The Tourist does all the time, right? They could do a few things. With PS5 Pro, it's more plausible, but I still think the issue is not predominantly the power of the console. Right. The power of the console is not really there in that case. I think the issue is just a lack of permeation and lack of success of those 8K panels.
This does raise a question, though, regarding the HDMI standard. I wonder if PS5 Professional will solve that, the bandwidth issue being limited to 32 gigabits per second. Perhaps we'll see actual full chroma support for 4K 120. Like, there's realistically no reason why they couldn't improve that. And I'm actually surprised the PS5 has that limitation to begin with.
It was cheaper at that point in time.
I guess so. I mean,
it was.
Chipsets around then were also a bit weird. Everything regarding 4K 120 and HDMI 2.1, that was a weird time when that first launched.
The standard's kind of not great in general, though, because you can strip out feature sets, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
it's
stupid. It's
not a great standard in the first place. In fact, the HDMI form is kind of bad.
I hate HDMI. I'm just going to say it. I really do. Like, you just have these situations where, like, some cable just stops working, or you're getting handshake issues. Something's acting weird. It's not like an analog cable where you just get like a noisy image. You could kind of it's just like things just act a certain way and you have no idea why, and it's so frustrating.
A really classic example is you can buy a cable that is HDMI 2.1. It actually services HDMI 2.1 and it does all the feature set. But for our purposes, it also does other things that we don't want it to. Like it dithers the signal. So like I have a variety of cables that I can't use for my consoles at all because it dithers the signal, and then I can't get FPS data off.
Yep.
It's like, well, okay, what's the point of this?
HDMI, man, it's a mess.
HDMI,
Everybody says, oh, they're digital, they're all created equal or something, but no. There's a huge variance in quality that we've encountered. So